Welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast. Whether you're a first-time facilitator or a seasoned pro, listen in for tips and tricks to make a bigger impact at the next workshop you deliver. And now, your host. Her 3 p.m. go-to snack is a green apple, Leanne Hughes.
Hello everyone and welcome to the show. I'm your host Leanne Hughes and I'm here to help you create unpredictable workshop experiences that predictably work. I cannot wait to share this interview with you because my guest today is talking about having the superpower of indistractability. Oh wow, can you imagine a day where we actually got what we needed to get done? It's funny, I get so many comments from listeners and even friends saying, "Oh Leanne, you're so productive." But if only you could get a look in at my day, look at my computer desktop and how cluttered it is, how I get distracted by Instagram when I should be doing something as simple and as fun as writing this introduction and sharing it with you, how I use my phone up to the point of falling asleep. Yeah, so it's not the life I want to lead. I want to get better at making the most of my day, and you'll hear how we can become indistractable in this conversation. I talked to author Nir Eyal about everything from getting back to sleep when you wake up at 3 a.m, turning your values into time, focusing on your time inputs over your outputs. So looking at what you actually put in, the time you put in as opposed to completing something. You'll hear more about that. It will make more sense later on. We also talk about eliminating distractions in open plan offices and the power of time boxing your week, something that I have personally taken on since reading Nir's book. A couple of quick announcements in the world of First Time Facilitator and leannehughes.com. I'm working on my 2020 strategy for 2020 and I'd love your help and input on that. What do you want to see more of, hear more of, or less of? Let me know. A link to that survey is in the show notes. And secondly, after my recent Paris trip, I'm now a certified pivot facilitator. Well, what does that mean? What is pivot all about? Well, if you're curious to know more, I'm running a free 1-hour webinar on the pivot methodology on Thursday, the 28th of November. Now, if you can't make it due to time zones and, well, life, that's cool. The webinar is being recorded, but you'll only get the recording if you register over at leannehughes.com/pivot. Now, this webinar is for career pivoters. If you're trying to figure out what's next for you, you get a lot of value out of this, as well as managers who want to get better at holding effective one-to-one career conversations, as well as HR managers who are looking for a philosophy or a methodology to support both their employees and managers navigate their careers internally. Like I said, a link to register for that is over at leannehughes.com/pivot. Okay, so let me tell you more about today's guest. I am actually obsessed with his book, Indistractable. The author is Nir Eyal, and Nir writes, consults, and teaches about the intersection of psychology, technology, and business. The MIT Technology Review dubbed Nir as the prophet of habit-forming technology. Nir founded 2 tech companies since 2003 and has taught at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford. He is the author of the best-selling book Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products, as well as his current book Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. In addition to blogging at nirandfar.com, that's NIR and FAR.com, Nir's writing has been featured in the Harvard Business Review, TechCrunch, and Psychology Today. I have to say, in this interview, I get so excited and I want to cover everything, and I simply leap from topic to topic without really having a common thread. But what's really great about that is that Nir is so responsive and he's really quick to move between topics and share anecdotes and studies with you. So hopefully it sounds like a seamless conversation. Remember, if you want to continue the conversation when the podcast is over, you can join our community of over 340 facilitators from all over the world on the free Facebook group called The Flip Chart. In the flip chart, I actually opened up to listeners and said, hey, if you want to submit a voice message for Nir, send it through. And Sean Levin sent one, which you'll hear later on in this conversation. You can view a link to the group, my 2020 survey, and a ton of amazing resources that Nir shares to help you become indestructible over in the show notes at firsttimefacilitator.com/episode 91. Now, onto the show. I am delighted to welcome on the First Time Facilitator podcast, Nir Eyal. Nir, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Leanne. Great to be here.
I absolutely love your book. I've got the audio version and I've got the paperback version.
Oh, wow. You're a multimedia reader. I love it.
I am. And the reason I got the audio so quickly was I heard your interview with Jenny Blake on the Pivot podcast, and you just spoke to me. Everything that you were talking about in terms of distractions, I was looking for short-term hacks in terms of hacking back those external triggers, and I wasn't really thinking about the mindset. So that's why it really resonates with me. Can you just share with our listeners who may not have heard of you, tell us a bit about your career and business pivots and what led you down the road of writing Indistractable?
Sure. So let's see. So where do we start? So I started 2 tech companies. The first one was in the solar energy business, and then that company was acquired. And then the second company I started was in the gaming and advertising business. And this was around 2007 when we started that company. This was before iPhone apps because the Apple App Store didn't exist. The iPhone didn't exist at that point either. So we were in very early days. Back then, the only apps that people really talked about were Facebook apps. And so we had this company at the intersection of gaming and advertising. And we saw a lot of companies kind of come and go over the years. And many of them use these tactics from behavioral design to influence consumer behavior. And I became really fascinated by all this and wanted to figure out the keys to how we could change consumer behavior for the better. You know, I saw many companies like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, many of our clients in the gaming and advertising space, many of them would use these tactics, but not really understand why they worked. They just know that they did work. So when my last company was acquired, I wanted to set out to understand how habits are built with technology, through technology. And I didn't really see any book that described how to do that. And the idea was that, you know, if Facebook and the gaming companies can use these tactics to make all sorts of things engaging online, why can't we use the same tactics to make all kinds of healthy habits engaging? So that's why I decided to kind of explore this topic. I started writing about it on my blog. I started sharing the research that I was doing widely, and I got invited to teach a class at Stanford at the Graduate School of Business there. And then later I taught for many years at the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford. And then that turned into my first book, Hooked. And that was published about 5 years ago. And in that time, thousands of companies have used the tactics I describe in the book to help people get hooked to all sorts of healthy habits. So for example, Fitbod gets people hooked to exercising in the gym. Kahoot gets kids hooked to learning in the classroom. Bite Foods gets people hooked to changing their eating habits to eat a healthier diet. And so we've seen these techniques used widely across, you know, various industries, and that's terrific. That was really my intent with Indistractable. But shortly after Hooked was published, I found that there was a dark side, frankly, that had many of the companies that I had profiled in Hooked that I never worked for. I never worked for Facebook. I never worked for Google. What I did was to kind of extract the tactics that they used to democratize those tactics, to reveal these secrets so that everyone could benefit from them. But I also realized that some of these products were built so well that I wanted to use them too much. And I found myself getting distracted myself. And so that's when I decided I really wanted to figure out this problem. Just a personal anecdote, this kind of seminal moment for me in my life was I was sitting with my daughter one afternoon, and we had this beautiful afternoon. We could just, spend time together as daddy and daughter. And we had this activity book of different things that daddies and daughters could do together. And one of the activities was to ask each other this question, that if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I wish I could tell you what she said, but in that moment, I wasn't listening because I was distracted. I was looking at my device and I wasn't paying close attention. And so she got the hint and she went outside and played with a toy as opposed to being with me. And by the time I looked up from my phone, she was gone. And so that's when I really asked myself, wow, what superpower would I want? I would want the power to be indistractable, the power to do whatever it is that I said I am going to do. It's about living with personal integrity. So I decided to learn more about this topic and find ways to solve my own problem. And everything I read about this topic turned out not to be very helpful. I read a lot of books that said technology is the problem, get rid of your technology. So I did that. I got rid of my iPhone and I bought myself a flip phone. This only sent text messages and phone calls, no apps. And then I got myself a word processor from the 1990s with no internet connection. And I figured, okay, now I did what these books told me. I went on a digital detox and now I'm not going to be distracted. And so I sat down at my desk and I'd start to do my writing or start to do some focused work. And I'd find that I still got distracted. I'd clean up my desk. I'd take out the trash. I'd look at a book on the bookcase and say, oh, I should probably, look into that. So I kept getting distracted because I hadn't dealt with the root cause of the problem. And so that's really why I decided to, go deeper into this topic, because I found so many of the books on the topic of distraction and focus were very superficial. They didn't deal with the root cause really of why we get distracted.
Yes. And that's been a massive mindset shift for me, particularly when I'm trying to work on something and I find myself 2 seconds later on Instagram. Mm-hmm. Usually I'd be like, okay, put the phone in the other room. But what I'm asking myself is, why am I reaching for Instagram in this moment? And it could be because I'm finding it challenging. Maybe I'm not in the right environment to brainstorm. I'm sitting in front of a computer. I'm not walking outside. So it really gets you addressing why you do what you do. And I love that you talk about personal integrity as well. I think a lot of us, if we have to deliver a deadline for someone else, there's no problem, we'll get it done. But it's very easy to let ourselves down.
It's so true. And it's so annoying because we would never lie to our family. We would never lie to our children. We would never lie to our colleagues. And yet we lie to ourselves every day. At least I did. I would say I was going to eat healthy and I wouldn't. I would say I was going to exercise, but I wouldn't. I would say I was going to work on that big project that I've been delaying, and yet I procrastinate yet again. And so I kept doing this to myself. That's the problem here. My goal with Indistractable is not to tell people what they should do with their time, but rather to help people do whatever it is that they want to do with their time in order to get those things done that they themselves think are important in their life. That's my goal. That's really what being Indistractable is really about. It's about doing whatever it is you say you are going to do.
And I love that you also say the opposite of distraction is traction. That word hasn't been in my vocabulary for years. So can you talk through, because I like what you said, this book isn't about you can't watch Netflix and you can't scroll through social media. It's not about that. It's actually making time for things that you want to build on. So can you talk a bit about traction for our listeners?
Sure. So, it's very important to realize that the problem of distraction is not new. It did not start with the internet. It did not start with Facebook and YouTube. Plato talked about this problem 2,500 years ago. So distraction has been with us for a very, very long time. Plato called it akrasia, the tendency for us to do things against our better interest. And it's really a fascinating question if we think about it. If we know what to do, why don't we just do that stuff? Why do we keep getting distracted? It used to be that you could say, well, I didn't know what to do. But today we have no more information gap. If you're looking for what to do, it's at your fingertips, right? Just Google it, right? And frankly, who doesn't know basically what to do? If you want to lose weight, we know basically what to do. A chocolate cake is less healthy than a salad. We kind of know that. If you want to be closer with the people in your life, you have to spend quality time with them. If you want to do better at your job, you have to do the work, especially the stuff that other people don't want to do. We all know this stuff. So what's our excuse? Well, the excuse is, it's not that we don't know what to do. It's that success doesn't only require doing the right things. Success also requires that we don't do the wrong things, that we don't get derailed. And so I find that is a much bigger problem. Doing the wrong stuff is a much bigger problem than not knowing how to do the right stuff. So when it comes to distraction, the things that take us off track, I think it's really important to start with what do we mean by this term. And the best way to understand what distraction is to understand what it is not. The opposite of distraction is not focus. Many people will say it's focus. I disagree. If you look at the etymology of the word distraction also shares a common Latin root with the word traction, meaning it comes from the Latin trahare, which means to pull. So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want to do, things that you are doing with intent. The opposite of traction is distraction, anything that pulls you away from what you plan to do, anything that you are not doing with intent. Now, you'll notice both words, traction and distraction, end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N. That spells action. So this is really important for 2 reasons. One, anything can be traction. So I am not one of these people who says, okay, stop using technology, get rid of Facebook, stop using YouTube. That's ridiculous, right? Like, these tools are wonderful if we know how to use them properly. And part of using them properly is to use them on our schedule, not the app makers, no one else's schedule. And we have to remember here that, the distraction comes in all kinds of shapes and forms and sizes, not just the pings and dings from our devices. It can come in the form of other people. It can come in the form of your boss, your kids, your coworkers, whatever it might be. All of these things can lead you astray, can lead you away from what you plan to do. So anything can be traction as long as you plan for it. So if you plan time to go on Netflix or on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or any of these things, it's no different than watching a football game or a rugby match on TV. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you do it on your schedule, not on somebody else's. The other thing that's really important to understand is that just as everything can be traction, anything can be a distraction. And this is actually much more pernicious because it's hidden. Distraction tricks us. So what I used to do constantly, I would sit down at my desk and I would say, okay, now it's time for me to work on that big project. Now I'm going to finally finish that thing I've been procrastinating on right after I check email.
Yes.
Right after I talk with a colleague real quick. Right after I do something else, which is not the thing I plan to do. And so 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour later, I'm still doing that other task that feels like work, right? Checking email is kind of a worky thing to do. No, it is just as much of a distraction because you didn't plan to do it. So what's the big deal? You got to do email eventually, right? The problem is, if we do not understand what is the difference between traction and distraction in our life, we are constantly slaves to the urgent at the detriment of the important. We are constantly reacting as opposed to having time for reflecting. And that is a huge problem. If you can be the kind of person that makes time in their day to think, you have a leg up on everyone else, because no one today is thinking. No one has time for it. All we're doing all day long in the workplace is checking email and going to meetings. There is no time to think. And the reason there's no time to think is because we are constantly reacting and not making time for reflection. And yet when I talk to people and I say, do you need to think in your job? Do you need time to strategize, to plan for the future, to decide what you're going to do next in your career and your professional life? Absolutely. And I ask people, where is that time? I don't know, right? It's between meetings. It's while you're on the toilet. It's when you're waiting for someone to show up for a meeting. That's when you get 30 seconds of strategic thinking. So when you make that time in your day to do the things that are traction in your life, this is a huge competitive advantage in the modern workplace.
Yes, it's really all about going in with intent. And I guess I'm so just geeking out. I'm just going to share examples of things I've taken away as well. But before I listened to your book, my calendar had a lot of sort of white space in it. So all the meetings in there were meetings I had with other people. I wasn't setting meetings for myself. So what I've done since is I've scheduled, okay, I'm going to wake up. I'm going to spend about 20 minutes getting ready. I'm going to schedule a 1-hour run. Then I'm going to have coffee. And actually, it looks like I'm regimenting my day, but it's actually provided more freedom.
I'm so glad you said that, because the common reaction I get, so we've skipped ahead to step number 2, by the way.
Sorry.
So there's 4 big, no, it's okay. So there's 4 big steps to becoming indistractable. The first is about mastering the internal triggers, which we can get back to. The second is about making time for traction. So it's really about turning your values into time. So basically what this requires is creating a time box schedule, meaning you're planning out your day in advance. And you're accounting for how you want to spend your time. Now, that doesn't mean that your day needs to be spent only doing productive, quote unquote, work type tasks. No. I actually advise people to start by taking care of themselves first. Do you have time in your day for proper rest? Do you have time in your day for proper nutrition, hygiene, all the things you need to do for yourself? If you value physical health, do you have time in your schedule for some kind of activity, some kind of physical exercise? Not that I'm saying everyone needs to have that value. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your time. But if that's one of your values, to take care of your body, to grow your mind, take care of that stuff first. Make sure it's on your calendar. Then I advise people to make sure they have time for their relationships, for their significant others, for their children, for their friends. We have a loneliness epidemic going on right now because people don't make time for their friendships. And then only last, after we've taken care of ourselves, then we can take care of our relationships. And finally, we can take care of our workplace. And the way we do that is by making time for these important things in our life. And the pushback I oftentimes get, as you just mentioned, is, oh, that seems so rigid. I don't know if I can do that. I want time for freedom. What people don't understand is that white space in your day, that time that we think, oh, I want to be open to whatever comes my way, we know what you're going to fill that time with. You're not going to fill it with productive stuff. You're not going to fill it with things that are according to your values, whether it's taking care of your mind, your body, your health, your relationships. No, you're going to fill it with more email, more Instagram, more junk on the internet, more news that rots our brain. What we really need to do is to make the time for the things that we value most. And whether that time is time in prayer, time in meditation, time for a walk, time with someone else, we have to plan those things, because if we don't plan our day, someone is going to plan it for us. And so ultimate freedom really comes from this experience that almost nobody has. But once you've experienced it, it is an amazing feeling. Mm-hmm. When you plan your day and you do what it is you say you're going to do, that is a phenomenal feeling, because you go to sleep without this massive to-do list of stuff you didn't get done. That feels crummy. This is what's so demoralizing about the current state of personal productivity. When people say, oh, just get things done, put everything on a to-do list and you'll get it done. That's not good enough. It also has to be time boxed, because you know that feeling of, okay, here's all the stuff I need to do. You have a list that's 99 things that you need to do. You do 3 of them, and now you've still got 96 left to do. That feels horrible. Whereas when you use a time box calendar, you know exactly what you want to do with your time, and that's it. Which means that at the end of the day, you can go home and you can relax without guilt, without this negativity around, I could have done more. No, you didn't need to do more. You did exactly what you said you're going to do. That's an amazing, amazing feeling.
Yeah. And even when I've been time boxing, maybe I've been overestimating because I haven't done this before in terms of how long it will take to, say, do a proposal. And then if you finish earlier, you're like, yes, now I can just have some guilt-free time on Instagram.
Sure, absolutely. And so this actually leads to a really good point. Many people, we just plan out the output. And it's a trap, right? Because if you think about it, all we do is plan out the output. We say, finish the proposal, finish the chapter in my book, finish this, do that. But that's the output. What we're not accounting for is the input. The input, of course, is our time. That's the one thing we can always control. So rather than saying, finish this, which many times, sometimes it takes you less time than you estimated. Most of the time, it takes you more time than you estimated. You can't always control those things. Like, for example, if you're preparing a big presentation, you need the numbers from Jim, and you need the graphics from Jennifer, and you need all this stuff that relies on other people that may hold you back. So you can't always control the pace of the output. What you can control always is the input. So instead of saying finish this, instead what you want to put in your calendar is work on this for 1 hour. That's what you control, especially with tasks that require a long time to complete. The stuff that's important but maybe not super urgent, the strategic planning, the writing, the presentations, the stuff that requires deliberate effort over a long period of time. That's the kind of stuff that many times people will procrastinate on because they put on their calendar, finish it. Well, finishing it is too much work. You can't do it all at once. But if you say, okay, I'm going to work on it for 1 hour. When the clock strikes after 1 hour, I'm done. I did my obligation. And the beauty of this is, this is how I finished my book. I worked on my book for 2 hours a day. That's it. If you do that day after day, week after week, month after month, you finish. That's how you work on these big projects, is based on the input, not necessarily the output.
It's interesting that you bring that up. A few years ago, I decided to run a marathon. And when I was looking for training schedules online, they were all about, okay, run 5 kilometers today, run 8 kilometers on Wednesday. And then I actually enlisted a coach. He had won a few of these marathons that I was entering. He sent me his schedule and it was run for 30 minutes, run for 50 minutes. So there's Beautiful. Absolute parallels. And what that meant was I could control the input. So if I didn't feel like running 10K, it's different to I can get up and I'll just go for 60 minutes. I can go slow, but I'll get it done. And that feels good.
Right. It's interesting, especially with creative work. This tactic really pays dividends. Ernest Hemingway talked about this, about how you have to leave the day's writing excited. You want more. And so by setting a time schedule and saying, look, I'm only going to work on it for an hour and that's it. Even if I'm having a great time, even if I want to work more, don't. Because then it leaves you wanting the activity, as opposed to what most people do. They procrastinate. Now they've got way too much that can be done reasonably. So they do a terrible job, one, and they hate it. They hate the process. Just like when people exercise, physical fitness, taking care of your health isn't about running 26 miles in one day. No, it's about doing a little bit every day. That's how you become healthy, but doing it for the rest of your life. An interesting anecdote here that I talk about in the book is about my trouble with sleeping.
I love that.
Oh, okay. You want me to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, please.
So for years, I had this problem where I'd wake up in the middle of the night, around 3:00 in the morning, and I couldn't fall back asleep. And I would ruminate about it. I would, oh my goodness, if I don't fall asleep now, I'm not going to get good rest. I'm going to be stressed tomorrow morning, and I'm going to be groggy, and I'm not going to do a good job on my presentation. And I keep ruminating and ruminating. And when I tried to figure out, okay, what was really going on, it turns out that there are some folks who do suffer from some kind of pathology when it comes to sleep. But the vast majority of people who struggle with getting enough sleep, turns out that the number one cause of insomnia is worrying about insomnia. And so what I replaced what I used to do, which is worry about stuff I couldn't control, with a simple mantra. And that mantra goes like this: the body gets what the body needs. So I can't control whether my body wakes up. And frankly, I started listening to my body. And if my body woke up, it's because maybe I didn't need that much more sleep. And there's nothing wrong with that. So by not ruminating on the problem and saying, look, I did my job. I went to bed at 10 p.m. I did what I needed to do by being in bed on time to provide my body the opportunity to get enough rest. The rest is out of my control. So now when I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't get back to sleep, I just repeat this simple mantra: the body gets what the body needs. I even say it's an opportunity, because if my body doesn't need rest, well, I can read my Kindle. I have this ebook. By the way, I don't recommend reading on your iPhone or your iPad or any kind of digital device other than a Kindle. But I see it as an opportunity, because apparently my body doesn't need more rest. And I'll read for a little while, and I'll stop ruminating on the problem and say, look, I did my part. The rest is up to my body. And what happens when I do that? Well, there's no more rumination. I stopped worrying. And of course, I started falling back asleep. And so this is a great metaphor or allegory for what happens to us with creative work, that you can't necessarily predict what's going to happen when you sit down at your desk. You can't make yourself come up with that amazing idea for the proposal or come up with an amazing presentation. You can't necessarily will yourself to be super creative right now on demand. But if you don't plan the time, if you don't sit down at your desk, there will be no way you will be creative. There will be no way you will do this work. So your job is to plan the input, to plan the time when you won't be in bed in order to get proper rest, to plan the time at your desk in order to do your best work. Because if you don't plan for that time, for sure, 100%, that stuff won't get done. So you have to control the inputs, and the outputs will follow.
Thank you for sharing your sleep story. I did have it sort of highlighted down because a lot of the listeners on the show, and myself included, we are running workshops in front of new audiences. It's new content, new clients. Running workshops can be unpredictable. So the night before, we think we're prepared, but you can never really fully prepare for an interactive workshop. So many previous guests have said, oh, it's really important to get a good night's sleep. And we know that. But I think what you're sharing is just one really great strategy, a really practical mantra that we can use to not put that pressure on ourselves. And because I certainly have that self-talk, I wake up at 1 or 2 and think, I need to get back to sleep. Otherwise, this will happen. I won't be energized. So thank you for sharing that.
And I feel that too. I mean, I feel that all the time when I'm traveling and you have time zone differences and you're going to be on stage and you're going to teach tomorrow. And that simple mantra of, look, it's okay. If my body doesn't get enough sleep one day, it'll make up for it the next day. The idea here is to just control the inputs. Don't worry about the outputs. Those will follow.
Yeah. And look, before we go back into sharing the 4 different steps of being indestructible, how is the promo and the launch going? Because it looks like your life is just crazy at the moment, traveling everywhere, speeches every day, media opportunities. How are you taking care of yourself?
So far, so good. I mean, I'm back to normal. I'm back to my regular schedule back at home. I was doing quite a bit of travel, but now things have kind of resumed normalcy. So while I travel, I was just in London. I got back from London last week. So that was very regimented because we were doing this press tour. And so I had to be at this meeting and that interview, et cetera. But now that I'm back home, what's nice about keeping a time box calendar is that once you do this activity once you plan out your day, and I'll give you a link for the show notes. I built this very simple tool because a lot of folks ask for, should I do this on Google Calendar? Should I do it on Microsoft Outlook? And I think those tools are a little bit overbuilt. So I built something very, very simple. I'll give you a link for the show notes. There's no fee, there's no sign up, nothing. Anybody can use it. And the idea is to simply have this template. And once you have your template for what your ideal week should look like, making adjustments from week to week is very easy, right? So the idea here, you make it once, maybe it takes you 30 minutes to do the very first time. But then you can go back to it once a week and you ask yourself, okay, what went well last time? And what can I do so that next week my calendar becomes easier to follow? So we adjust our time continually. We iterate on this process and we say, oh, you know what? I could have used some more time for email, or, oh, I've got some meetings that are coming in at this time, so maybe I should move my focused work time around a little bit. That's fine to do in the week ahead. So for me, it was very easy to get back on track because, I'd made that time box schedule once, and then I could adjust it accordingly for the week ahead. Even when I'm kind of thrown off track by going overseas, I can get right back into it when I'm back.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing with that. And I do love the tools that you've got, even that simple one for open plan offices and what you can put on the screen.
Yeah. That's a super helpful one. I mean, that has to do with the third step of hacking back the external triggers. So the external triggers are, the pings and dings and rings, all of these things in our environment that pull us off track. But just as bad as all the technology might be in terms of leading us towards distraction, what we oftentimes don't consider are how people can distract us. And so in an open floor plan office, one of the solutions that I provide is this screen sign. So it's inside the book. There's this piece of cardstock that you pull out of the book, you fold it into thirds, and you put it on your computer monitor. And it tells your colleagues, I'm indistractable at the moment, please come back later. And so that's how we can hack back these external triggers, come in the form, not in the form of technology, but come in the form of other people by letting our colleagues know, hey, look, for this hour and a half, I need to do focused work right now. Please come back later.
Brilliant. And it's funny, I did a sort of listener survey yesterday. I had, what topics would you like to explore related to facilitation, and then outside, what are your pain problems? And so many people wrote back managing the external triggers, managing the people, the phone calls, actually getting focused and achieving what I want to do. So this book couldn't come at a better time. I know that we did skip right ahead in steps 2 and 3. Can we just, I think step 1 is super important. You mentioned time management is pain management. Yeah. It's a huge revelation. Like I said, the focus seems to be on in modern literature about putting your phone in another room, but let's talk about the mindset.
Sure. So back to this question that Plato had of why do we do things against our better interest? We know that we can be led towards traction or towards distraction, but what leads us towards those things? What spurs us to all action? It turns out that when you ask most people what prompts us to action, what's the seat of human motivation, they will tell you some version of carrots and sticks. This goes back to what Freud called the pleasure principle, that everything we do is about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. But neurologically speaking, it is not true. That is not what is going on. That in fact, the brain has 2 distinct networks. One is called the liking system and one is called the wanting system. And we know that the purpose of the liking system is to create memories of pleasurable sensations so that the wanting system spurs us to action through desire, through craving. And the way it does this is called the homeostatic response. It does this by making us feel discomfort. So long story short, we do not do things that we do in the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, but in fact, everything we do is about the desire to escape discomfort. Even the pursuit of pleasurable sensations, wanting, craving, desire. There's a reason we say love hurts, because neurologically, that is exactly what is going on. Everything we do is about the desire to escape discomfort, even the pursuit of pleasurable sensations. We know this to be true physiologically, that if you go outside and it's cold, you put on a coat. And if it's hot, you take it off. If you're hungry, you feel hunger pangs, so you eat. And if you're stuffed because you ate too much, that doesn't feel comfortable, you stop eating. So everything we do is about this homeostatic response. It's about relieving discomfort through action. Now, those are physiological sensations. The same holds true for psychological sensations. So when we feel lonely, we check Facebook. When we're uncertain, we Google. When we're bored, we check stock prices, sports scores, the news, Pinterest, Reddit. We look at these things. We use these products and services to relieve these uncomfortable sensations. So if we agree that all human behavior is spurred by a desire to escape discomfort, that means that time management is pain management. That fundamentally the reason that we go off track is because we are looking for something to solve that discomfort in the quickest way possible, whether it benefits us or not. And so this is how we form habits, doing things we later regret. Because when we find something that solves our pain, that pacifies that discomfort, we turn to it again and again and again. And it's not until we wake up and realize why we do these things, what is the emotion we are looking to escape, it's not until we do that that we can really put distraction in its place.
And that's why it's such an important question to ask every time you sort of are aware that you're doing something else that you shouldn't be doing, thinking, what am I trying to escape here? And you reference a really interesting study in your book about participants being in a room. They had the time to sort of reflect. There was no stimulus in the room apart from electric shocks.
Right.
Talking about pain, they actually started administrating electric shocks to themselves so they wouldn't be bored. That's insane.
Yes, it's insane. And yet, what was it, like 67% of men and 25% of women, when they were put inside a room and told, just sit in this room and there's nothing to do in this room other than electrocute yourself, the proportion of men and women would have rather felt something than to feel the feeling of boredom. Now, you could say, oh my God, these people are psychotic. What's wrong with people? But in fact, I think that's the wrong lens with which to look at this. The fact is, and this is one of the real beefs I have with the self-help industry these days, is that we are told if we are not happy all the time, if we're not satisfied with life, something's wrong with us. And I think that is malarkey. That is just not true. That in fact, from an evolutionary perspective, our species evolved to be perpetually perturbed. I mean, if you think about it, if there was ever a group of Homo sapiens who was contented, was happy, had everything they wanted and never wanted more, and they were by design made that way, let's say, I'm pretty confident that our ancestors killed and ate those people because we know that this need to want more. I mean, when you feel bored, think about this, 200,000 years ago on the plains of the Serengeti, when our species felt bored, what did they do? They hunted, they invented, they created, they explored, they progressed the species. And so that desire for more is what helps us advance as a civilization, as a species. And so that's not something to be ashamed of. That's not something necessarily that we should think if we experience that there's something wrong with us. I think that is ridiculous and it's not helpful. Instead, what we need to do is to realize that those sensations, boredom, anxiety, fatigue, uncertainty, stress, these sensations can be channeled towards traction rather than distraction if we know how.
Yeah, that's right. Going in with the intent. You brought it up in this conversation earlier that we need to turn our values into time. And I'm not going back, well, I am going back to time boxing, but more about why it's so useful is I say that my family and my relationships are really important. Then I go through the exercise of time boxing or reflecting on previous weeks. And what I notice is that my money isn't going where my mouth is. I'm not spending time. I haven't seen good friends in weeks. So I think that's really important to go in with that intent, figure out what your values are and how can you convert that into time. And one great example that you use in your book is talking about how you catch up with friends on a regular basis. Is it called the kibbutz?
Right, the kibbutz, right. So it comes from the Hebrew word for gathering. And the idea here is to find a way to regularly interact with people that you care about and who care about you. That we know that for psychological flourishing, according to what's called self-determination theory, we need this feeling of relatedness. We need to feel like we are part of a group, that people care about us and that we care about other people. And unfortunately, one of the downsides of increased secularization throughout the Western world is that we don't have those regular occurrences. We don't have the church group. And this is a trend that has been accelerating now since the 1990s. Robert Putnam wrote this in his famous book, Bowling Alone, that he observed the decline of these civic groups, bowling leagues, Kiwanis Club, church groups, these regular occasions that were on our calendar to get people to interact with each other. Now, I'm not saying that you need to go, convert your religion in order to get that back. I think that there are ways to find this in our lives, but we have to plan for it. So something that I did with my friends, we had this group of 4 couples, and every 2 weeks, rain or shine, same place, same time, we would get together for adult conversation and friendships. Now, children were invited. They could come. Everybody in the group had kids, and they were allowed to be there. But remember, children can be just as much of a distraction as your devices. So if children interrupt you, that can also be a distraction. I remember one occasion, one of the friends was talking about a very difficult situation they had at work. And all of a sudden, a kid comes up and says, I want a juice box. And it completely deflated the environment. And so we set some rules in place. And we tell our kids, look, you can listen, but you can't interrupt unless someone is bleeding. If one of the children is bleeding, okay, come let us know. But now we have juice boxes in the corner. We have games in the corner. Go play and either listen quietly or interact with your friends. Why do we do this? One, we need this, right? As adults, we need friends. We need other people in our life to talk with, to be known by, and to know them as well. And then two, and I think this is incredibly important, we need to model for our children what adult relationships look like. They need to see that we prioritize our friends. Why should it only be kids that have fun with their friends? No, we all need this for our psychological well-being. And so we want to exemplify what it means to have these friendships in our life as well.
Yeah, and the beauty of it, and what I picked up, was that it's recurring, it's in the same place at the same time. So there's no sort of, how often do we spend going back and forth with friends trying to set these appointments? It's crazy. So the fact that you've got it's something that makes it so easy, kind of built like a community group, is just really impressive. And I really wanted to highlight for listeners, because I agree with that. I think there's a lot of disconnection in our society, and it's really important to stay engaged, and something that I'll endeavour to do. Yeah, thanks for that, Nir. I've got a question from a listener, Sean Lavin. He's asking this question.
G'day, it's Sean from Brisbane, and thanks so much for the opportunity to ask a question. I often find myself distracted by important tasks that have previously slipped my mind. It's almost like a focused mindset allows forgotten tasks and actions to resurface. Can being indistractable work against you at times?
Okay, so there are only three reasons for every distraction. Either it's an external trigger, a ping, a ding, a ring, something in our outside environment, or it's an internal trigger, something that brews up inside of us, like an uncomfortable sensation, or it's a planning problem where a task takes longer than you expected, or something that you could have foreseen, you did not foresee. So those are the only three reasons for any possible distraction. So what I give people in the book is what's called a distraction tracker. But frankly, you could just do this with a piece of paper. You take out a piece of paper, and when you're doing your focused work, the things that you need to pay attention to, the strategizing, the creative work, whatever it is that you need to do focused work in order to be your best, I want you to just take out that piece of paper, and when you feel these urges to become distracted, I simply want you to write down that sensation. Okay, I'm feeling bored. This is frustrating. This is hard. I need to go do such and such. So if you realize, you know what, I better make sure I do that thing, exactly what the person who's asking the question is saying, oh, I remembered I needed to do that thing. No problem. You've got your distraction tracker right next to you. Write that down. But under no circumstances, go do it. Because if you go do it, and why do people go do it? Because they want to relieve the anxiety of something hanging over their head that they would have otherwise forgotten. And I get that. But the solution is not to go do it, because now it has instantly become a distraction because it's not what you plan to do with your time. But you alleviate that discomfort by writing it down on your distraction tracker. After that work block, after you've done that time boxing period and you've fulfilled your obligation to yourself to do what it was you said you would do at that time, now take a look at that thing that you recall that you needed to do and find time for it as soon as you can in your calendar. Once you make that calendar, once you make your time box schedule, you have to commit to it.
And there's something very powerful about getting out a pen and just writing it down, noticing it, letting it sit, and continuing on. So thank you for sharing that tracker, and we'll link again to that in the show notes for this. Just a final question before we sort of wrap up. We've talked a lot about us as individuals not being distracted. This is a bit of an interesting question. I don't know what you think about this one, but as facilitators, we're in front of a room and we're there to keep our participants engaged in the content. Sometimes you're there for a day or 2 days and hours, and you might see participants like picking up their phone and them getting distracted. What are some ways that we can bring in indistractability to influence others so that they sort of pay attention to what we're sharing?
Yeah, so I know this problem intimately. I do a lot of public speaking, a lot of workshops, a lot of presentations. And to be honest, I would get very offended when I would see people on their phones, because I would think, why are you on your device? You should be listening to me. And then I decided to embrace this, because if we agree that the reason we become distracted is because we are looking to escape an uncomfortable sensation, what that is telling you is that you're boring. When I'm on stage and I see people looking at their phones, that's not a criticism to them. That's a criticism to me. That if I am not capturing people's attention, now this is not 100% true, right? Sometimes somebody is dealing with an emergency that they just need to react to right now. Their kid is sick. They're texting their husband or wife and trying to figure out what's going on. I get that. That's okay. But if I see too many of those people in the crowd, then that tells me to up my game. That means that I'm not able to hold people's attention. The material isn't helpful enough. I'm not engaging enough, and I need to do better. And so I take it from the perspective of not they have a problem, but maybe I have a problem. That to me is a much more proactive approach, because I don't think we can change people by saying, okay, everybody, no matter what you do, don't check your devices. We don't know what's going on in their lives. Maybe they need to check their devices. And two, why should we ask them to? A great presentation, when people go see a Broadway show, almost nobody's checking their phones, right? When you go see a wonderful movie, you want to stay engaged. And so I think that behooves us as speakers to take that as a sign of how we can improve. I will say, though, I thought the question was going to go in a little bit of a different direction in terms of the workplace. There's a whole section in the book in terms of what do we do when, even though we become indestructible, what if our workplace has a culture that is very distracting? For example, you can say that you've time boxed your life and you know your schedule. And yet if your boss decides to call you at 8 p.m. on a Friday night when you're with your children, you're with friends, you're exercising in the gym, if your boss calls you on the phone, is it the phone's fault? Is it the technology's fault? Or is it the fact that your boss doesn't respect your time and that you work in an organization with bad workplace culture? And so that's, I think, a very, very important issue that in my research, what I learned is that distraction in the workplace is a symptom of dysfunctional company culture. That's the real source of the problem. But by the way, this has nothing to do with jobs that require a lot of hours. If you want to be an investment banker, if you want to work at a startup, okay, you're going to have to work a lot of hours. And if that's what you want to do with your time, if you're living according to your values, go for it. I have no problem with that. I don't believe in these laws, like France has that says 35 hours by law. I think that's ridiculous. I think people should have the right to work as much as they want if it's in accordance with their values. What I have a problem with is when we go into a workplace and we think we're working 40 hours a week, but really, we're working 70 hours a week because 30 of those hours are spent on nights and weekends tethered to our computers. And we haven't really left the office behind. We're still working even when we're not at work. That is a bait and switch. That's not right. That's what I'm trying to rally against, are these workplace cultures that are dysfunctional, where people can't talk about this problem. And that is actually the source of the problem. It's the fact that people have to keep quiet about this and don't have what's called psychological safety in order to fix this issue.
Yeah, that's right. And part of your chapter, Sync with Stakeholders at Work, you bring up some really important questions here. So perhaps the biggest unknown to the employee is how they spend their time, both inside and outside of work. So even attending networking events, taking those calls after hours, talking to clients, dropping things so that they can attend all these certain things. There seems to be an inherent culture, but like you said, people are very scared to bring it up because of a lack of that safety. But what's interesting, right, what I've noticed in my leadership courses is people want to be present at home, but they're reinforcing the culture by engaging with it, and everyone just does it because we follow what other people do. So we think
absolutely
standard is, if you actually ask them, they don't want to do that. No one wants to do it.
Nobody does. That's exactly right. And that's why this is so important. I mean, that section in the book on how to build an indestructible workplace, to me, that's the most important section in the entire book, because what we find is that there's a certain type of work environment that is literally driving people crazy. We know that there's a confluence of two factors, and this study was done out of Oxford by Stansfield and Candy, that when people have the confluence of two conditions, high expectations plus low control, this literally leads to depression and anxiety disorder. This is causing people a tremendous amount of psychological discomfort. And what do people do when they feel psychological discomfort? They feel more of those internal triggers. And what do they do when they feel more of these internal triggers? They become more distracting, not only to themselves, but to the entire organization. What do you do when you don't feel in control, when you don't feel enough agency in your life? You grasp for it somewhere. How? By sending more emails you didn't need to send, by calling more stupid meetings that no one needs to actually attend. And this literally perpetuates what we call the cycle of responsiveness, that people enter into this vicious cycle that was first studied by Leslie Perlow out at Harvard Business School that perpetuates even more distraction. But the root cause is not the technology. The root cause is a culture that can't talk about this problem. That is the root cause of the problem.
There's an excellent TED speech on this, a French guy, Yves Moreau. I don't know if you've seen it. I might send you the link after this conversation. But he says the reason why we have so many layers within organizations is because just two people can't seem to talk to each other. So they build all these different teams and departments so they don't have to collaborate.
There's something to that.
So, I mean, that's the great thing about your book. It targets the individual, but also looks at the workplace as well and setting up the environment. You talk about mindset, but what I really love is it's complemented by really practical steps, even down to what your desktop on your computer should look like.
Absolutely.
That was a big one for me, something I'm still yet to work on, but I'll do it. Nir, if people would love to find out more about your book and find out about your work, where should we send them?
Absolutely. So my website is called nirandfar.com. Nir is spelled like my first name, N-I-R. So nirandfar.com. And if you go to indestructible.com, there's a free workbook. There's a complimentary video course, all kinds of resources that we couldn't fit in the book that I wanted to make sure we made available online. And that's all at Indistractable. It's I-N, the word distract, A-B-L-E, Indistractable.com.
Wonderful, Nir. Thank you so much for this interview and making the time. But secondly, for writing this book. I think it's so important and powerful. And it's going to have a massive impact on the people, the teams and the organizations that really want to get involved and to have that superpower of indistractability. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for sticking around. You've reached the end of another episode of the First Time Facilitator podcast. Connect with the show at firsttimefacilitator.com or follow me on Instagram at Leanne Hughes to find out what I'm up to during the week. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it with someone who will also appreciate the insight, and make it easier for yourself and subscribe to the show in your podcast player of choice. Thank you so much for listening, and chat to you next week.